Hey everybody, Raul Avila here, the salsa expert. I know it's been a while since I posted, but I want to get back into it, and I'll be posting something every week regarding something to do with salsa music or dance, and hopefully it will be of some value to you. But right now, what I want to do is start a 4 or 5 part video series regarding a video that's out there on YouTube right now. It has to do with someone interviewing Frankie Martinez and Josue Joseph. And the reason I'm addressing this is because someone had come up to me and they saw the video and they were quite confused about some of the answers that they were given regarding things like difference between on 1, on 2, and clave and things like that. So what I want to do is I'm going to address that video and the questions that were given. We'll listen to the answers that they gave, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to clarify some of the things they said. And what I want to do is filter out fact and fiction from what they were saying. So let's listen to the first question.
As an on-one dancer, I've thought about switching to salsa on 2, but it looks the same to me. Salsa on 2 dancers start on the first beat of the music and they end on the 7th, just like what we do on 1. I've been told that the difference in the change of direction and body movement, but after visiting several classes in New York, I don't see the difference. Can you explain and demonstrate the difference?
They were teaching me ballroom and I was breaking on 1.
So the first question has to do with somebody wanting to know what's the difference between on 1 and on 2, because they don't see the difference. And well, yes, if you're dancing on 1 or you dance on 2, you're using the same counts, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Frankie doesn't really answer the question. He goes on to his own personal experience, but he doesn't fundamentally answer the question. And basically the difference is that when you're doing your basic step, you're breaking forward on your left foot and back on your right foot, landing on 2 in the measure of music. If you're dancing on 1, you're coming forward and back on the 1 beat in the music. And that's the most fundamental difference. But if you were to video somebody dancing on 1 and on 2 and take the music out and just from the waist up look at them dancing, you wouldn't see any difference. I'm going to address more in depth the difference between on 1 and on 2 on another video. So the next thing he says within his personal experience is that he went to a ballroom and he started learning on 1. And he associates ballroom kind of with 1. And that's not true, because people were always dancing on 1, whether they were in Cuba or New York from the 30s, 40s, 50s. The majority of people were always dancing on 1. It was just a certain smaller percentage of people who actually decided, because of, for whatever reasons, they wanted to learn how to dance on 2. So ballroom and 1 don't really go together.
I was very comfortable on 1, and dancing on 2 was a very kind of strange thing, and my body did not want to deal with it at first. But when I did have it, it felt, there was something, and I'll use this for lack of a better word, but there was something very sublime about how I felt while I was moving that way. And I later understood that that had to do with a couple of things.
So the next thing that he mentions is that once he got dancing on 2, he said that he, for lack of a better term, he uses the word sublime. He felt sublime. All right? Now, feeling sublime is a bit of a subjective experience. So it doesn't really mean anything. It's his experience. You can have an on 1 dancer connecting to the music and feeling just as sublime as he did or does when he's dancing. So does that validate one over the other? No, it doesn't. And then he mentions that this sublime experience had to do with a couple of things that he found out later, but he doesn't say what those couple of things are. I would have liked to know what those things were that clarified that for him. So he says something quite interesting though. He says that when he was learning on 1, it felt very comfortable when he learned it. And then when he made the transition to 2, it felt very strange, and it was, his body was rejecting it. And that's a great point, because everyone goes through a similar experience. Dancing on 1 feels natural because we're gravitating towards the downbeat. And because of our experience with music from the time we're very young, we gravitate naturally towards the 1 beat. As a matter of fact, the basic step that is used to dance on 2, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, the reason that it was structured that way was to help people dance on two by having them step on one first. You have to know that during the mambo era, nobody was using that basic step. Everyone was stepping directly on the two beat. This basic step came along as a crutch to help dancers to dance on two. Because you naturally gravitate to one, they use that 1, 2, 3 to start you off. It feels a little bit unnatural to dance on two. It becomes an acquired taste.
It's very difficult for them because they haven't experienced it. Experiencing it gives you a very clear idea of why it feels differently. It's not.
He then goes on to say that, well, for a person who doesn't have an understanding or an experience of dancing on two, they just won't know what the difference is. And again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, that there is a fundamental difference that we can explain to somebody musically and also in the basic step, because people who dance on one tend to dance directly right on the one beat with their left foot forward, and people who dance on two will start with their, let's say, right foot forward into their left foot forward when they're dancing on two, or going back on the left and then back on the right. So those are fundamental differences, right? And there are a few different things that are going on within patterns because of that little shift in the basic step. But for the most part, a lot of what you see is the same. But the only fundamental difference is where your breaking step is landing. Left foot forward, right foot back. Is it landing on one or two in the music? Fundamentally, that's different. And of course, the little difference in the basic step structure.
What we think is coming up with dance ideas and possibilities are random, right? And they're not necessarily musically based on anything. We're doing physical randomness that happens to work because we're doing it within an 8-beat structure that works with music that has an 8-beat structure.
Then he goes on to say that people are doing random stuff, and the reason it fits is because it fits into this 8-beat structure of the music. But it's not random. People are doing turn patterns and figures and that go with the structure of the basic step. So it's not random per se. It's just other movements and figures and patterns that you can apply to this basic step structure in this dance. So to say it's random is a little bit confusing and not clear.
I call it the Mac and PC academic, right? If you look at it, there's a lot of people that start on PCs and then they end up getting a Mac and they go, wow, this is kind of cool, right? You don't get traffic in the other direction. You don't get people that start on Mac and then find PC and say, wow, this is really cool, right? There's a lot of traffic, people starting on one and ending up on two, and they say, wow, this is what I've been looking for. There is zero traffic in the opposite direction.
Another interesting point that he makes is the comparison between the PC and the Mac, and using that to relate it to on one and on two. He's basically saying that PCs are like people dancing on one, and the Mac is like people dancing on two because it's cooler, okay? And he says there's zero traffic. Like when people make the transition from going to one to going to two, they don't go back to one. And that is just not true. I have my own personal experience. I was teaching in Westchester and in New York for, I don't know, almost 20 years. And I see people making that transition back. They try the two, they do their best to get it, and they just feel more comfortable on the one, so they go back to the one. So again, this is just a personal opinion that really doesn't mean anything to make this comparison between the PC and the Mac and then relate it to on one and on two. What he really wants to note is that it depends on what circles you run in. If you want to learn on two and all of a sudden you start running within these on two circles, then that's the people you're going to be hanging out with, and of course you're not going to go back to one. So again, it's just not true that people, once they go to two, they never go back to one.
Once I did understand it, once it became comfortable to my body, I could dance with anybody on anything because it was necessary for me to learn about music in order to dance on two. It was not necessary for me to learn about music in order to dance on one.
The last point that he makes is that when he learned to dance on two, Now he can dance on anything because he had to learn music to learn how to dance on 2, but he didn't have to learn music to dance on 1. Well, let me just clarify that. It's not like he went to Juilliard or anything to learn music. The only thing that you have to distinguish when you're learning to dance on 2 is to learn to hear the 1 to 8 count. That's it, for the most part. And so that's what all dancers that learn to dance on 2 do. They learn to distinguish where that 1 to 8 phrase in the music is occurring so that they could align themselves with the music in that way. So we know that usually the leaders go back on 2, forward on 6. Ladies go back on 6, forward on 2. That's really all. Nobody really has to learn music. But yes, you have to learn where that 1 is. And once you learn where the 1 is, you can count from 1 to 4 or 1 to 8. And you'll know, so if you want to dance on 3, you know where the 3 is. You want to dance on 1, you know where the 1 is. Again, the fact that you had to learn this 8-beat phrase does not validate on 2 being better than on 1. Yes, it makes you a more aware dancer, but when you think of what dance is about, it's really about freeing your soul. It's about having fun. And you can have just as much freedom of soul and fun on 1 as you do on 2.